First of all, Theresa May has been chairing a meeting of the government's National Security Council this morning, discussing what further measures, if any, should be taken against Russia for the nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Our diplomatic editor, James Landale, joins us. James, tell us about some of the measures that she could use.
Oh, there's lots of tools that the Prime Minister could deploy to ratchet up the pressure on Moscow. She could expel more diplomats. She could be much more explicit about the economic pressure that is going to be deployed on wealthy Russians who have links to the Kremlin, who are based here in the UK. There's a whole sort of, palette of things that she could do. But the impression I get is that there's a very live debate within government about how strongly, if at all, the government should respond to the latest retaliation. Because essentially what's happened so far is that there's been the ritual exchange of diplomats. The Russian diplomats are leaving today. We've seen some pictures of the coaches leaving. But there's a real debate, I think, within government that says this. On the one hand, yes, we should continue to respond to the Russians, and so we should look at the next phase of this process. Or others say, no, actually, is it more in Britain's strategic interest to keep this debate an international one, about maintaining the international pressure on Russia, rather than getting sucked into some kind of bilateral tit-for-tat row with the Russians? So it'll be very interesting to see which way they go.
Yes, as you say, it does look as if the government, particularly Boris Johnson, want cover at the very least from EU partners and from NATO, who've certainly shown solidarity, although there was some quibbling over the wording yesterday from the EU. Will they, these other organisations, actually exert any sanctions and measures themselves against Russia?
My own assessment is that I think it would be very, very hard to get specific new, unanimous EU support for something like new sanctions. That's simply because there's not the appetite for it, or even before this crisis blew up, there was an appetite amongst some European countries, particularly the Italians and the Greeks and others, saying they want to try and weaken EU sanctions against Russia anyway. So I don't think that's what the British are asking for. I think what the British are saying is, look, this incident in Salisbury, that's just the version of Russia's aggression that's affected the United Kingdom. But look at this is a pattern of behaviour by Russia. Look at all these other threats to your own individual countries. What do you think you could do to put more pressure on Russia individually, unilaterally? Can we help you doing that? So in other words, we're not talking here about, agreeing to anything collectively, but in terms of, something that's going to be agreed in Brussels, but just getting other nations to say, actually, you know what, we think Russia is has stepped over a line here, and that this is what we must do in terms of putting pressure economically, putting pressure on cyber, and essentially, as one official said to me, making sure that in every single international forum, Russia feels more and more uncomfortable, more and more under pressure, so that in a few months' time, they think, actually, you know what, we overreached ourselves, we went too far.
Right. When might we hear about any new measures, if any?
Well, I mean, the NSC is meeting this morning. What normally happens after these events is, we get some form of a readout, sometimes through the, the Westminster lobby correspondence, just to give us an assessment of, what the NSC has been discussing. We also might get, I think, an update on where the investigation is, because quite often the NSC is obviously briefed on where that's going. So there might be more details on that. Also, what's going on in terms of the process of giving some samples to the chemical weapons watchdogs inspectors who began their work yesterday.
James Landale, thank you. And listening to that, do you think Theresa May should actually exert further sanctions, bearing in mind the rhetoric has been quite strong against Russia and its attack on British soil?
I agree with James that I think the danger with tit for tat is that Putin isn't the sort of guy who lets the other person have the last word. So there's a danger of escalation if we just keep ratcheting it up unilaterally. And I think we have to keep working through the multilateral fora. We have plenty of backing within the European Union at the moment, at least for a diplomatic position. There'll be no new sanctions. The EU has done all it's ever going to do now. I mean, remember, there are sanctions in place.
Yes.
But I think there's been an impressive show of Western unity over this. And we've got to really fight to keep that, because then, as James said, is when the Russians start to feel the heat. I think if we just keep doing small measures at home and the Russians retaliate, actually we're in danger of being outgunned if Putin's willing to go further than we are, and it might not achieve that much.
I mean, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have said that we still need to engage with Russia, but having expelled the diplomats, what form does that take, that engagement?
Well, we haven't expelled all the diplomats, and it's a bit like if you think back to the Cold War. there was a conflict with Russia, but the channels of communication were kept open all along. And that's what international politics is like. You make your point, you've done something to displease us, but at the same time, there are all sorts of issues. We're still, I hope, talking about Syria behind the scenes. There are all sorts of international issues we need to be discussing with Russia, and completely cutting them off is not the way ahead, I don't think.
All right, well, let's leave it there for the moment because we're going to move on to our daily quiz. And the cash-strapped parliamentary authorities have got into hot water for spending nearly £10,000. So our question for today is, what on? Is it A, a home cinema for John Bercow's apartment, the Speaker? B, money to stop the trees in Parliament's atrium from falling over? C, a relaxation room for stressed MPs? Or D, training for MPs on how to use Instagram? The mind boggles. Well, at the end of the show, Anna will give us the